Hi guys, welcome to the first video of the year. Our first unit is going to be the scientific method, and you have probably had this in every single science class that you have been in, and you've probably seen something similar to this poster here. And so we're going to kind of walk through the steps of the scientific method. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it because, again, you have probably had this in every science class that you have. So we're going to focus a little more on our hypothesis and then specifically the parts of an experiment. And so what I like my students to do is on their notes page in OneNote is I like them to write out the learning target. And so you should see a big learning target at the top of your notes. And then this is what I want you to write. And so I'm going to let you pause the video so you can write this. So basically what you're going to be able to do after this video is you're going to be able to differentiate. So that means know the difference between your independent variables, dependent variables, control groups, experimental groups, and constants. So the different parts of an experiment. So pause that, write it, and then click play. All right, hopefully you wrote that down. So step number one is if there is a problem, we need to be asking questions about it. And that's what scientists do. Every single scientist, they will notice that there is a problem. And sorry, one other thing. My suggestion would be to pause the video, get all your notes written down, and then click play so you can hear me explain it. That would be a good strategy for this. So step number one, you need to identify a problem. If you don't have a problem, you don't really have anything to fix. And so I have come up with an example that we're going to use throughout this video, and I absolutely love The Office. Love The Office. And so we are going to focus on Dwight's, this is Dwight's, his beet plants. He's a farmer and he grows beets. So he sees that there is a problem. His beet plants aren't growing like they should. Maybe they're way too small, right? They're not selling on the market, and so he has a problem. So what he's going to do is he's going to ask a question to try to solve that problem. So his question is, does fertilizer help beet plants grow bigger? Okay, if his beets are bigger, he'll get more money for them. He will make a profit. So identify a problem and ask a question. Step number two is to form a hypothesis. And you've probably heard this word since you were just a little tyke. So a hypothesis, its definition is a testable idea. Okay, it has to be testable, and it's based on your observation and then research as well. And we will be doing a lot of research in biology during our lab portions of the class. Okay, you might have heard of it as an educated guess at some point. This is going to predict an outcome of an experiment. And then we are going to write it, and this is really important. We're going to write it as a fact. So an if and then statement. And so what do I mean by that? Okay, so here is my formal hypothesis for Dwight's beet plants. So example, if, as you can see that always comes first, if fertilizer is given to beet plants, okay, so there's my, my question, am I giving fertilizer to them? If fertilizer is given to beet plants, then, and now I'm predicting, then they will grow on an average 1 pound heavier than plants not given fertilizer. This is very, very specific, and when you are writing your hypotheses, I would like you to be as specific as possible. It just makes for a better hypothesis. Okay, so an if and then statement. Okay, so again, I put my hypothesis up here because we are going to break this hypothesis down. So when we experiment, there are different parts of an experiment, and this is the main focus of Learning Target 1, so make sure you're paying close attention here. So we have what we call an independent variable. Okay, an independent variable is the variable being tested or manipulated. And so it's what you as the scientists are physically changing. And so my example is the fertilizer. That is my independent variable. I can give some plants fertilizer, but I'm not going to give other plants other fertilizer. Okay, it's what I can control as the tester. So independent variable. Then we have what we call a dependent variable, and the dependent variable depends on the independent variable. So the dependent variable is what changes throughout the experiment. Okay, so a change that occurs as a result of the independent variable. And so many students get these wrong. Okay, and so what I like to think about it is independent variable has that I in there, so it's what I change. Okay, I can't physically look at a beet and make it grow bigger, right? I can't change that. What I change is if that beet gets fertilizer or not. And then depending on if it gets fertilizer or not, it's going to either grow bigger or it's not. And that's our dependent variable. Okay, so our dependent variable is we're going to be looking at the weight of a beet plant. And most of the time, the dependent variable is something you can measure. Then we have our controlled variables. In a good experiment, you are just changing one variable and you're keeping all the other things the same. You will hear it be called a control variable or a constant. So you need to be familiar with both those words. In my example, I'm going to give all my plants the same amount of water. They're going to get the same amount of sunlight, and they are going to have the exact same soil conditions. So I'm not going to put one in really fertile soil versus one in clay. Okay, so all those factors are going to be controlled. The only thing I am changing is the fertilizer. Okay, and again, many students get these wrong, so make sure you ask questions, either email me, ask me in class about these. Okay, some more important parts of an experiment. We have a control group. Okay, it's different than a control variable. Whenever you see this word group, we're talking about the individuals. And so a control group does not receive the variable being tested. It's just going to be used for comparison and it's going to get the normal conditions. So my example is my control group are beet plants not given fertilizer. And so the important thing when we're talking about groups is you have to include the individuals that you're testing. So in this case, it's the beet plants. So beet plants not given fertilizer. That is my control group. Then I have my experimental group. So this is literally the group that I'm testing my variable on. My example is my beet plants that are given fertilizer. And notice again, I include beet plants. Because if you just say fertilizer, that's not a group. That's our independent variable. And so in order for it to be a group, you have to include your individuals. So in this case, my beet plants that are given fertilizer. I hope that makes sense. And if it doesn't, please make sure you ask questions. Okay, so we're going to do a sample problem, and I guess I'll read this to you. What's the harm? So a researcher wants to test the effects of protein powder on the muscle mass of athletes. One group of athletes drinks protein shakes after their workout, and the other group of athletes drink only water. The athletes are the same age, weight, sex, and use the same exercise program. Okay, so that means they're all the same age, so maybe 17, they all weigh 170 pounds, they're all male, and they all are just doing push-ups. Okay, so same exercise program. The researcher checks the muscle mass of each group of athletes after 1 month and records the results in a data table. So this is a question. So what I want you to do is I want you to try to guess it before I show the answer. So feel free to hit pause just so I don't accidentally give it away. Okay, so we're looking at the muscle mass of the athletes. What is that considered in this problem? Okay, so the muscle mass is what we are measuring. And so if we are measuring something, that's got to be the dependent variable. Okay, it depends on whether they get protein powder or not. Okay, that's what we're measuring. Next question. The athletes given the protein powder is the what? Okay, so remember we have our individuals in here, so we have our athletes given the protein powder. And so if you guessed experimental group, you are correct. Okay, that's the group we're experimenting on. The amount of protein powder given to the athletes is considered what? Okay, this is the variable that we are changing. We can choose to give protein powder or not. So if you guess the independent variable, you are correct. Okay. Okay, it's what we are manipulating. The athletes given the normal diet are what? Okay, here again, here's our population. There's our group. Okay. The athletes given the normal diet are considered the control group. If you ever see this word normal, more than likely we're referring to that control group. And then what are the controlled variables of this experiment? So I'll give you a few seconds to answer that. If I didn't give you enough time, just click pause. Remember, the controlled variables, or the constants, are what we keep the same between the groups. And so in this case, we're keeping their age, weight, sex, and use of the same exercise program the same. So those are going to be our constants, or our controlled variables. Okay, so after we do our experiment, we're going to figure out our results. And so we are going to collect a lot of data in biology, and we're going to end up putting these in tables and graphs. And so this can be collected in two ways, and you are going to hear these words so often, so please get this in your brain. We have quantitative data, and think that is quantity, okay? So that means numbers. Whenever I ask you, include quantitative data, you better include some numbers, okay? This could include the number of milliliters, the number of grams, the temperature, the muscle mass, right? How big their muscles are, inches, centimeters, whatever it may be. And then we also take qualitative data, okay? So this is our descriptive data. So if I say qualitative, you better be thinking of your five senses. So what do you taste? Well, we're not going to taste much, or much of anything. What do you feel? What do you smell? What do you hear? What do you see? Okay, these do not include numbers. It's just, what do you see? Okay, then we have our conclusions and discussions. And so our conclusions, we have to figure out, was our hypothesis supported or not, and why? Okay, we always have to figure out why. And then if you were to go on and become a scientist in the field, your experiment would be repeated by others. If your hypothesis was not supported, then you might need to come up with a new hypothesis and new tests. And then most of the time, you are always going to experience a discussion. Okay, so why was this conducted? Okay, Dwight wanted to make more money, and so he wanted to see if he could get his beets to grow bigger. What improvements can you make? We're going to ask this question a lot. Okay, what maybe went wrong, and if you had to do this again, what would you improve? Were there any errors that you made? Unfortunately, we are not perfect, so you will probably make some errors in your experiments, and that's completely fine because this is science. Okay, we make lots of mistakes. What are the applications? So basically that means, how can this be used in the real world? And then what could you do for future studies? So how could you build on this? And you will be asked these questions when you write your lab report. Okay, so make sure you're thinking about that. And last but not least, you're going to be communicating your results. And so in this class, you will be writing lab reports, okay, for every experiment that you do. So be happy about that, okay? It can also be used in a scientific journal, posters, presentations, etc., etc. So that is learning target 1. Thank you so much for hanging on with me, and I hope you learned something. All right.